My name is Melliti, Assistant Professor of English at Military Academy, Tunisia, and researcher in ELT materials, specifically course books, and interested in discourse analysis, and particularly genre analysis. I'd like to thank Canterbury Christ Church University for inviting me to participate in this important conference with this important theme. I would like also to thank you for attending my presentation today. Today I'd like to talk about the problematic presence of culture in ELT course books. Particularly, my presentation is about how inappropriate cultural matters are handled in global course books. So this paper addresses an important issue in relation to globalization and language teaching. It reviews the way controversial matters related to inappropriacy and representation are treated there. Writing a global course book designed to be used all around the world necessitates catering for world audiences, which obliges ELT course books writers and publishers to make compromises in the content. Culture is a very sensitive issue in global course books because of global cultural diversity and sometimes contradiction. Optic in 1993, Vinay 2000, which makes defining it a difficult task, according to Holiday 2005. Defining culture. The problem of defining culture for Holiday 2005 is that it is related to how to frame it. For him, it is a fallacy to think of culture as deterministically related to geography to the extent that every country, region, or continent has a distinct autonomous culture. He claims that the danger in such understanding of the notion of culture is that it might lead to reductionism and stereotyping. One illustration of this claim is Said's assertion that despite the complexities of the Middle East region, it is reduced in the West to the notion of Islam. Cram's 1998 defines culture as a membership in a discourse community that shares a common social space and history, and a common system of standards for perceiving, believing, evaluating, and action. The matter then concerns the way particular groups perceive the world, which is in the case of ELT course books highly important as it decides the acceptance or resistance of particular communities to their content. Prodromu 1988, Optic in 1993, and Kanagraja 1999. In the same vein, Wardaf 1992 advocates that culture contains what a particular person needs to know in order to act appropriately according to the norms of their particular community. The emphasis, hence, is on the particularity of cultural norms, Flardo and Miller 1995. Such a particularity of cultural norms represents an obstacle for publishers of global course books as it challenges their potential of designing globally accepted materials without running into cultural sensitive issues of people all around the globe. The exploration of inappropriacy is important because it reveals publishers' concern to produce appropriate course books that could sell internationally. The end product of this attention to what is globally inappropriate could be related to the notion of globality, being the product of the process labeled globalization. And this is the definition of Schaffer 2007. In this context, researchers talked about the notion of inappropriacy that is to be avoided in global course books. Defining inappropriacy. Inappropriacy concerns efforts made by course book writers and behind them publishers to deal only with what Renner 1997 and Gray 2002 call safe topics by avoiding terms and issues perceived as culturally offending for some potential users around the globe, or even non-aspirational. With regard to safe topics, Revolucri 1999 argues that course book writers deliberately avoid some real-life topics as ambition, rage, jealousy, betrayal, destiny, greed, fear, and the other Shakespearean themes, which are far from the soft, fudgy, subjournalistic, woman magazine world of Ifeli's course materials. End of quote. The reason behind this sanitized content is for Gray 2002 the guidelines that the publishers impose on course book writers. Examples of inappropriate or politically incorrect cultural terms and topics are found in Gray 2002, who calls them parsnips. Parsnips is an acronym that refers respectively to politics, alcohol, religion, sex, narcotics, isms, and pork. The assumption behind the avoidance of these topics is that they are inappropriate for many cultures. In fact, culturally unacceptable issues vary across the world, and what is perceived to be taboo or problematic in one culture may be normal in the sense of being accepted in other cultures, Article 1993. Interviewing the publishers of Headway Intermediate Source and Source 1996, Gray 2002 found that other examples of inappropriate issues that are to be avoided in ELT Global Coursebooks include anarchy, AIDS, Israel and six-pointed stars, genetic engineering, terrorism, and violence. Gray 2002 detected the tendency that some of the above-mentioned inappropriate topics are avoided through the investigation of the content of a coursebook, as well as through the guidelines imposed by publishers. The guidelines consisted in every topic that the publishers perceived as upsetting and controversial for their potential global users, such as political and ethical matters. For seemingly cultural reasons, publishers impose on ELT coursebooks writers a list of topics and issues to be avoided, Vinay 2000, Grade 2002. This claim is attested by Vinay, who himself is a coursebook writer, in a reply to an article written by Rinvolukri in 1999, in which he strongly criticized ELT coursebooks. Vinay 2000 contended that publishers provide coursebook writers with guidelines to be followed. One of the guidelines in the Heinemann Guide for Authors 1991 dealing with inappropriacy is quoted in Vinay 2000. I quote, "Due to the sensitivity of some of the markets for which we produce books, we have to be very careful about the topics which we cover. Obviously, when producing books for the UK and Northern European markets, most subjects are acceptable, but in more conservative and religious markets, there are various things we must be careful with. The list below should be used as a guideline, but please do discuss any topics you feel strongly about using with your editor." End of quote. Vinay 2000 states that the list includes abuse, AIDS, narcotics, terrorism, disputed borders, sex, rape, religion, and pornography. The concurrence of this list in ELT coursebooks could show the accentuation of globality by focusing on controversial and problematic issues. Interestingly, for the publishers and coursebook authors, the more inappropriate topics are avoided in a textbook, the more it is likely to be considered global, Brunner 2002. However, trying to cater for a world audience and at the same time avoiding to offend the world audience could result in what Gray 2002 calls sanitization of content that aims at making the coursebook politically correct. Dendrinos 1992 explored this issue too and concluded similarly that sanitization of content based primarily on trivialization of topics and opting instead for advertising and comedy is an observable characteristic of ELT global coursebooks. Hence, it can be argued that cultural diversity of the world represents a challenge to the monoethnic, monocultural content issues peculiar to the target language culture invested in coursebooks. Target language culture, called also L2 culture, refers to the lifestyle related in the context of global ELT coursebooks to native speakers of English. As will be shown afterwards, teaching target culture is claimed to be important for learners, Cortasi and Gen 1999, Tanazulas 2001. Viewing the particularity characteristic of Anglo-American cultures, they are bound to be different and even to contradict the cultural norms of diverse world cultures, Alptekin and Alptekin 1984. The example Alptekin 1933 provides illustrates this claim, as he argues that while a child from the Anglo-American world will normally think of a dog as man's best friend, Middle Eastern children are likely to perceive it as dangerous and dirty. The statement is at best problematic, if not downright racist, as the author could have evoked that in Middle Eastern culture, a dog stands for fidelity as well. No doubt, the contradiction Alptekin 1993 illustrates could create opposition to the material itself or even to learning a foreign language. Kanagraja 1999 addresses such possible resistance to cultural content manifested, for example, in ideological icons presented in American Kernel Lessons, Intermediate, O'Neill, Yidden, and Cornelius 1978. In his study, learners in Sri Lanka, Tamil, showed resistance to the content by vandalizing the coursebook through drawing images or changing the dialogues in it to load it with their particular local concerns related to independence from Sri Lanka. Both of Optic in 1993 and Kanagraj in 1999 target the ideological, including the cultural, mismatch that could exist as a result of cultural difference. The existence of such a resistance to target language culture is an obstacle not only towards publishers' desired globality, but also to learners' need to be aware of target language items. Illustrating this importance, Optic in 1993 asserts that a learner of English who has never lived in the target language culture will most likely be confronted with problems as far as the English language system is concerned. If the English systemic data, i.e. knowledge of the formal properties of the language, are presented through such unfamiliar contexts as, say, Halloween or English pubs. Optic in 1993 stresses the fact that unfamiliar cultural content makes language inaccessible to learners from different cultures due to difference in schematic knowledge. He states that while a pub is a place for socializing as far as native speakers of English are concerned, for some societies it is not linked with the same background knowledge. Rochman, 2007. Culture, it is claimed, is a very influencing factor on learning, especially for foreign language learners who come to the English class with their previously acquired knowledge that they learned while learning L1. It is from this perspective that investing target language culture content in ELT course books detracts world learners from learning effectively. In fact, some researchers question the feasibility of ignoring culture in ELT. For example, Valdez, 1991, asserts that there is no way to avoid teaching culture when teaching language, as they are interconnected to the extent that culture itself penetrates all the corners of language education. However, Valdez links the investment of culture in teaching language with appropriacy, as he suggests that if culture cannot be escaped, it seems obvious that every teacher and every learner should be alerted to it and should make the most of it, to use it as a tool for learning language where appropriate. Rampton, 1990, highlights the necessity of teaching target language culture and goes as far as claiming that ignoring it when teaching a foreign language means promoting cross-cultural misunderstanding. Therefore, excluding culture from ELT course books could produce learners with understanding disorders, a problem that seems similar to the situation described in Elwood, 2004. Coming to a foreign country reminds me of starting to watch a movie from the middle. Starting in the middle, we don't understand the story and we don't know the characters. It takes a while to understand what's going on. Sometimes we think we understand, but then we realize that our interpretation was wrong. It can be confusing and even frustrating. If we ask someone who has watched the movie to explain, his or her explanation may be too complicated, or on the other hand, it may be too simple. Using course books that are empty of target language culture therefore confuses learners and hinders their effective learning. However, the target culture is bound to contain culture-specific elements which are at odds with some markets of the global course book. Optic in 1993, Kanagraj in 1999, Vinay 2000. Talking about this issue, Ellis 1990 argues that global course books do not give enough consideration for not offending Muslims in the content. Areas where this insensitivity figures, according to Pennycook 1994, are, I quote, social interactions between men and women, including living together, advertising for boy-girlfriend in personal ads, a favorite of textbook writers, and holiday romances, social settings, often boy-meet-girl setting, and the drinking of alcohol, which are all discordant with Islamic norms, and other topics such as rock music, astrology, gambling, and revealing clothes, miniskirts, off-the-shoulder gowns, swimsuits, which all pose problems to Muslim audiences. End of quote. These inappropriate cultural items mentioned in ELT Global Course Books present an obstacle to the globality of the course book, as they could be in contradiction to the schematic knowledge of world audience and at the root of learners' resistance to them. Kanagraj 1999. Schematic knowledge refers to the knowledge acquired from society, while systemic data is knowledge of the formal properties of language. Carrel 1981. It is argued that learning the language is difficult to happen without accessing the cultural practices related to that language. Castro 84, Widowson 1990, Hyde 1994. An example that illustrates this claim is that learners of the foreign language face problems when attempting to read materials if they do not have access to the cultural background related to that foreign language. Article 1993. Carrel argues that in order for comprehension to take place, The text is bound to contain the suitable cognitive schemata, as L2 learners are more likely to understand the text if it contains a theme that is familiar for them. Absence of content schemata, which is familiarity with the topic or the theme, could result in what Wallace calls lack of cultural competence, which is learners' knowledge of beliefs, values, attitudes, and behaviors of the target language culture. This fact hardens the attempt of coursebook writers to produce an appropriate content. The development of this cultural competence is perceived to be reduced because of publishers' guidelines concerning avoiding inappropriate items, VNA 2000, grade 2002. These guidelines are not specific to one culture, but as diverse as the diversity of world communities. VNA 2000 summarizes these restrictions on content or visual representation. I quote, "Pictures of people with cigarettes can get books banned in some school systems. Low cleavage in pictures gets them banned in others. Inadequate ethnic balancing is a serious problem in the USA. Representation of women will be analyzed and counted in many countries. Some countries don't like to see disputed territories labeled on maps. You could have a section on holiday in Gibraltar, Israel, the Falklands, and Taiwan, and get effectively banned in several countries with one unit." This quote from Vinay depicts the controversy faced by coursebook writers in their attempt to cater for world audiences, Bashar 2003. It seems that this is the price to pay in order to reach globality. Making compromises is essential for the global coursebook to be marketable globally, reaches 1999, Bashar 2003. However, the question is how far the writers of global coursebooks could go in their attempt to please every group or prospective textbook users around the globe. To conclude, it could be said that culture is an important and sensitive component of ELT coursebooks. Accounting for it is fundamental to provide learners with the cultural aspect of the language, which is essential to acquire the communicative competence needed to interact in English. However, addressing it in coursebooks without considering learners' sensitivities as far as inclusivity and inappropriacy matters are concerned could deprive the coursebook from important markets and learners from effective learning. For this reason, compromises need to be made by ELT coursebook writers in order to avoid the rejection of their product. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would like to thank again the conference organizers and Canterbury Christ Church University for such an important theme in